I married the man who'd been my nemesis since we were kids. But right before the wedding, I got into an unexpected car accident. To make sure we could live together peacefully after the wedding, I had a wild idea: I'd fake amnesia. But who would have thought that the moment he found out I'd lost my memory, he leaned in and kissed me. My name is Joanna, the heiress of the Booth family in J City. The man sitting next to me is my lifelong nemesis, Larry. Of course, he's also now my legal husband, at least on paper. Right now, we're in the car on our way to the bridal shop to finalize the details for our hair and makeup. The car is spacious. Larry and I are on opposite ends, with a galaxy of distance between us. I was scrolling through my phone, looking at several trending topics on X. They were all about the marriage alliance between J City's Larry and Booth families. Inside the threads, a ton of finance bloggers were deep in heated discussion and analysis. Even a layman could tell this was a high society marriage purely for business. The Larry Group's official account posted a congratulations message with a photo of me and Larry. In the picture, both of us looked completely miserable. No one in their right mind would use the word happy to describe it. Most importantly, in that photo, I had a pimple on my forehead. My mouth twitched. I zoomed in on the picture until it was maxed out, then turned to confront Larry. Larry, you. The words died on my lips. The wedding was just a few days away. We'd managed to keep up a fragile peace on the surface. Wouldn't a fight just ruin it all? I swallowed my words and went back to my phone, trying to silently calm my anger. But then, I heard Larry's slightly raspy voice. What is it now? What is it now? Now? Do I, Joanna, cause that much trouble? The anger I had just suppressed flared right back up. I locked my phone, crossed my arms low, and raised an eyebrow at Larry, who was lazily leaning back against the seat for a quick nap. He had the same nonchalant look he always had when we were younger. That just made me even angrier. It was like Larry could sense it. He cracked his eyes open, slowly lifting his gaze to meet mine, and waited calmly for me to speak. A storm was about to break. My back straightened instinctively, and I lifted my chin slightly. Just as I was about to fire back a retort, a sharp, piercing screech of brakes filled the air. Before I could even react, someone pushed me down, holding me tightly in their arms. A crisp scent of pine filled my nose, and my world went completely black. I couldn't see a thing. All I could hear was the chaotic blare of horns from every direction. It felt like our car was hit and sent flying, then it started to roll, falling endlessly. All I could feel was a sharp pain in my shoulder where I was being held. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. I tried to move my stiff body, wanting to sit up, but the moment I bent my leg, a piercing pain shot through me. The stark white room was empty. I fell back onto the bed, completely drained. Every frame of the car crash flashed through my mind. Larry. I wondered how he and the driver were. I stared blankly at the ceiling, unable to forget that embrace, so warm it felt like it could melt you. It kept replaying in my mind, over and over. My face was burning as if I had a fever. I tried pressing the back of my hand to my cheek to cool it down, but it was no use. What did he mean by that? We were nemesis who had fought since we were kids. Suddenly, an excited voice popped up in my head, but he saved you. He held on to you in such a dangerous situation. Another, gruffer voice immediately shot back, so what? Are you planning to get along with your nemesis now? We're getting married, of course we have to get along. And you're sure he won't think you've been possessed? I shook my head hard, trying to stop the crazy thoughts. I pulled the blanket over my head, hiding my entire face. Though, it would be great if I really had been possessed. That way, I'd never remember what happened before. Wait a second. Never remember? A light bulb went off in my head, flashing with scenes from countless cheesy, Amnesia the med romance novels I'd stayed up all night reading. In an instant, I found the perfect solution: fake amnesia. I rehearsed by myself in the hospital bed for a long time, imagining every possible reaction Larry might have. Now, all I had to do was wait to see him. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened as I'd hoped. A doctor in a white coat entered first, followed by Larry, who had a bandage wrapped around his forehead. His usually slicked back hair was now hanging obediently over his forehead, all of his casual, laid-back demeanor gone. As I was staring, the two of them had already walked to my bedside. The doctor adjusted my foredrip with one hand and asked, "Mississippi Booth, how are you feeling?" Here we go. Time to test my acting skills. I deliberately unfocused my eyes and put on a bewildered expression. "I think I've forgotten some things." The doctor nodded calmly, pulled a pen from his small breast pocket, and started jotting something down without giving me a second glance. My gaze slowly shifted to Larry. I secretly tensed the muscles in my casted leg, and a familiar wave of pain spread through my body. My lower lip trembled, my eyes filled with tears, and I whimpered, "Husband." That utterly heartbroken tone, that deliberately drawn-out syllable. I bet even if my own parents were standing here, they wouldn't recognize me. Larry, as expected, froze. He looked completely stunned. The doctor stopped writing and looked over at Larry. "It's likely a temporary cognitive impairment stimulated by the car accident. We'll need to run a more detailed and comprehensive examination on Mississippi Booth later." I regretted it. But if I told them I was just kidding now, he'd probably have me committed to a psychiatric hospital in the next second. So, I blinked, and a tear rolled down my cheek. Larry, who had been standing to the side, suddenly leaned forward and wiped away my tear with his long fingers. "It's not a cognitive impairment. I am indeed her husband." His hand gently caressed my face with a tenderness I had never felt before. My eyes went wide, and I was so shocked by his sudden gesture that I didn't dare move a muscle. Larry looked at me, and for some reason, a small smile played on his lips. The next second, he cupped my face and placed a kiss on my forehead, murmuring softly, "Don't cry." The faint, gentle scent of pine wood suddenly became incredibly intense, surrounding me. My heart skipped a beat, then started racing. This was completely outside of my script. I had imagined all sorts of reactions from Larry when he found out I had amnesia, but I had never, ever imagined this one. I stared at him, dumbfounded, unsure how to react. But Larry had already straightened up, tucking my blanket in for me before turning to find the attending doctor, who had left at some point. I raised my hand to my forehead, my mind a total mess. "Larry, were you possessed, too?" After another detailed examination, Larry pushed me in a wheelchair into the doctor's office. The doctor looked at the lab results and concluded, "It's a type of post-accident stress syndrome, which manifests as temporary memory loss or confusion. There's no great treatment for it at the moment. The main thing is to rest and recuperate." Larry's brow furrowed at the news, and he turned to look at me, sitting idly by. I immediately sat up straight and asked softly, "Is it serious?" Larry raised an eyebrow, a flicker in his eyes, as if he found this version of me quite novel. He let out a soft chuckle, said goodbye to the doctor, and walked over to me. As his hand rested on the wheelchair, my body tensed, like I was sitting on pins and needles. After so many years of fighting, I really wasn't used to being this close and friendly with Larry. I leaned forward slightly, trying to subtly distance myself from the backrest. But a hand landed on my left shoulder, pressing me gently back against the cushion. "What are you hiding from?" Larry looked down at me, his voice tinged with amusement. "Aren't I your husband?" A nerve twitched in my forehead, and I bit my lip gently. For a split second, I thought the accident really had scrambled my brain. Otherwise, how could I have impulsively called him husband? I'm truly reaping what I sowed. After taking a deep breath, I looked up at Larry, ready to take my innocent little flower persona to the extreme. "I've been sitting for too long, I just wanted to stretch a bit," I said, my tone full of grievance with a hint of a pout. "How could you say that about me, husband?" Larry stared at me, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment before his lips curved into a satisfied smile. "My mistake, husband was wrong. I never realized how much you liked those two words before." Larry's assistant, Gary, had already brought the car around. When it was time to get in, Larry gently lifted me into the back seat. As I glanced up, I saw a look on Gary's face like he was totally shipping us. "Larry, your assistant is as weird as you are now." The Bentley drove into a villa community in the southern part of the city, stopping in front of a 3-story duplex villa. This was the marital home our families had prepared for me and Larry. But neither of us had ever set foot in it. Our marital home. Larry's reflection was visible on the window. He was leaning back lazily against the seat, a half smile on his face. "Forgot this too?" Oops. First time faking amnesia, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to remember this or not. I pulled my gaze back from the window and was about to answer when I heard a soft laugh. Then I saw him turn, get out of the car, and open my door. Larry leaned one hand on the car door and extended the other to me, his posture casually cool. Seeing me look at him, he raised an eyebrow again, his tone uncharacteristically serious for a moment. "If you forgot, you forgot." He paused, then suddenly leaned closer to me, his voice dropping slightly. "Husband will help you remember." The car door was half open, and the warm yellow light from the street lamps slanted into the car, adding a touch of warmth to the cool night. He was backlit, the light outlining the deep contours of his brow and eyes. I was mesmerized by the smile in his eyes and dazedly placed my hand in his cool palm. Larry's smile deepened. The moment my feet touched the ground, he swept me up into his arms and even gave me a little bounce. The Bentley behind us sped away, not daring to linger for a second longer. Larry stepped into the courtyard, speaking with a newfound interest. "Every blade of grass and every tree in this yard was planted according to your tastes." I looked at the pavilions, terraces, rock gardens, and jade ponds in the yard, all accented with wisteria and green bamboo. It was serene and elegant. It was indeed my style. "But what does that have to do with you, Larry? As far as I know, you were living in a different apartment before this." I pressed my lips together, feeling a bit speechless. It was pitch black inside after we entered, and the air was filled with a faint floral scent. Larry, holding me with one arm, turned on the lights in the villa. The huge villa was empty of servants, but the furniture was neatly arranged, new and spotless. After Larry placed me on the sofa, he remained standing in front of me. I looked up at his chiseled jawline, wondering what he was going to do. I watched as Larry tugged at his collar, then suddenly bent down slightly to meet my gaze. After a few seconds, he slowly leaned in, his approach utterly aggressive. My heart suddenly sped up, and I instinctively recoiled, watching him warily. "What are you doing?" A faint smile touched Larry's lips. He reached for the throw pillow next to me and tucked it behind my back. "Someone's leg is injured," Larry said, his tone teasing. "Shouldn't her husband take care of her?" My hands clenched the hem of my skirt, little flames of anger flickering inside me. "Husband, husband, husband your head. Why don't you just get those 2 words tattooed on your forehead?" I took a deep breath and put on a serene expression. "Thank you, husband. You're the best." Larry hummed in agreement, a smile reaching his eyes as he lazily leaned back on the sofa. But how could I let him rest? I glanced around the villa's layout, then turned my head to look at Larry, who had just sat down, and said softly, "So, did my husband carefully pick out and arrange all of this?" Larry leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, his voice casual and unhurried. "Who else but me?" He sounded completely unapologetic. I blinked, then made a request, a hint of mischief in my voice. "I'm a little thirsty." Larry froze for a moment, then looked at me with a raised eyebrow, his gaze intriguing. A moment later, he rose slowly and deliberately dragged out his words, "All right, I'll go find something for my Joanna." The villa's kitchen was huge, so big that all I could see was the solitary figure of Larry rummaging through cabinets. I couldn't help but smile. My wedding to Larry took place a week later, just as planned. During that week, our interactions could be described as friendly. Basically, he said his piece, and I played my part. But since it was a business marriage, the wedding ceremony itself wasn't overly complicated. Aside from the formal banquet at noon, the main event was the rooftop reception at 8 o'clock tonight. Many new companies had set up shop in J City this year, and our two local family businesses were inevitably feeling the impact. To maximize profits, and because Larry and I appeared to get along in front of our elders, both sides decided to use this marriage to form a partnership and stabilize our companies. Lately, both families had been busy planning various strategies, with no time to worry about the real situation between us. Tonight was a crucial opportunity for them to network with people from various industries. I had never fantasized about my wedding. And I figured Larry probably hadn't either. The only difference between us was that I was born to be married off, and he was born to inherit the family business. But that wasn't sad at all. Here I was, dressed in my wedding gown, separated from the banquet hall by just one door. The wedding march began to play. The heavy doors in front of me swung open, and I finally saw the romantic and dreamlike venue. Thousands upon thousands of red roses were scattered throughout the hall, dotted with tiny white lights, like a river of stars had fallen into a sea of flowers. In the dimly lit hall, the only spotlight was on me, a soft beam of light following my slow, step-by-step advance. Larry stood at the end of the aisle in a dark suit, looking regal and poised. The hall was filled with guests, yet it was completely silent. I walked up to Larry and stood before him, my heart filled with a strange mix of emotions. Larry looked back at me, his deep eyes swirling with an unreadable emotion. I picked up the silver wedding band from the tray held beside us and took his fair, slender hand. The moment I was about to slide it onto his ring finger, I paused. I looked up at him. Larry raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly. Thinking of running away now. He paused, pushing his hand forward half an inch so the ring was stuck in the middle of his finger. Isn't it a little late for that? I smiled, looked down, and pushed the ring all the way on. I was just afraid my husband didn't want to marry me. Larry glanced down with a soft scoff and didn't answer. He took the bride's ring and, with a focused expression, slipped it onto my ring finger. The next second, he leaned in. One hand supported the back of my head while the other rested on my waist. Our lips pressed together, and the crisp, woody scent of him brushed past my nose. It was faint, yet searing. Though it was just a light touch, it sent my heart into a frenzy. Larry's gaze was dark and intense, his voice low. "Mrs. Larry, don't forget this next time." 8 o'clock in the evening. A world-renowned symphony orchestra was already on the rooftop, playing graceful and melodious music. Dressed in a pearl white, fitted fishtail gown, I walked arm in arm with Larry under the flash of the media's cameras, wearing a blissful, sweet smile. After a brief presentation by the Larry and Booth families about their recent collaborations, the reception officially began. All sorts of distinguished guests gathered, chatting and laughing over clinking glasses. Only one corner stood out, completely at odds with the festive atmosphere of the reception. That was where our childhood friends, the ones I grew up with alongside Larry, were gathered. I owed it to Larry that I even knew them. When I was little, my parents were always busy with the company and had no time for me. They thought about sending me to daycare but were afraid I'd be lonely. Then, they had a brilliant idea with Larry's parents, who were just as busy. They just sent me next door to the Larry's house to play with him. The day I met them was also the day Larry and I officially became rivals. I remember when I stepped into the big courtyard, little Larry was with his buddies, discussing what game to play that day. I was wearing my favorite fluffy pink tulle dress and little leather shoes as I stood before them. Little Larry raised his tiny fist and suggested they all play a shooting game. I pouted, and in a delicate, whiny voice, I told the group of excited boys that I wanted to play princess and knight. The boys looked at each other, some fidgeted with their hands, others lowered their heads. It was clear they didn't want to play but couldn't bring themselves to refuse me. But I was too young then and stubbornly stood in front of them, convinced they would play with me. In the end, only little Larry stood up and said to me in a fierce little voice, "There's no such thing as a princess in the real world." A few seconds after hearing that, I ran back to the Larry's villa, sobbing my heart out in front of Grandpa and Grandma Larry. That night, little Larry got a spanking from his grandpa and was grounded for several days. Pfft! Remembering little Larry's tear-streaked face, I couldn't help but chuckle. Larry stopped in his tracks and turned to look at me. "What are you laughing at?" "It was you," I answered with a smile, but cut myself off the next second. That was close. I almost blew my cover. Not far away, Jake was waving enthusiastically at us. Pretty much everyone from the old Courtyard gang was sitting over there, and they looked like a bunch of troublemakers. But I'm sorry. The current me, Joanna, can only pretend not to remember you. "It's nothing," I said, pulling my gaze away and nodding towards Jake, who was still waving. "Should we go over there?" Wasn't that a stupid question? Given how he and Larry hung out every other day, of course he had to go over. Looks like I'll have to put on another big show. I looked at Larry, waiting for his answer. The light on the rooftop was hazy, and the dim glow perfectly outlined the profile of his face. He followed my gaze towards Jake. He frowned for a moment, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Let's not go over for now." "Huh? You don't remember this either?" Larry gently removed my arm from his. "Those are the friends we grew up with." I just stared at him, still stunned. He let out a soft laugh and tapped me lightly on the forehead. "You go on ahead. I have something to take care of." I met his eyes, which were filled with a lazy smile, and felt that something was off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Seeing that I wasn't moving, Larry bent down slightly to be at my eye level, and said in a drawling, playful tone, "Is my Joanna really this clingy?" I shook my head and started walking toward the corner. Halfway there, I glanced back at Larry. He was still standing there lazily, his shirt unbuttoned at the top 2 buttons, looking as roguish as ever. "Joanna, why didn't Larry come over?" Jake handed me a drink, looking at Larry's back with a puzzled expression. I glanced at Jake. "How should I know? Aren't you two married? How could you not know?" Jake started to grumble. "I don't care, Joanna. You have to get him over here." Jake's loud voice was giving me a headache, so I had to reluctantly agree. All right. He just said he had something to do. He'll probably be over in a bit." Jake's face lit up at my words. "That's our Joanna." "What Joanna?" Felix, who was sitting at the other end of the circular sofa, chimed in with a laugh. "You should be calling her Mrs. Larry now." Right. Jake sidled up to me, clinked his glass against mine, and grinned slyly. "Mrs. Larry." The silky, drawn-out syllables drilled right into my ear. My eye twitched, and I practically gritted my teeth. "Jake. Present." I smiled at him sweetly. "Don't make me slap you on this beautiful night." The words were barely out of my mouth when Jake shoved his face right in front of mine, closing his eyes with a look of pure enjoyment. From a short distance away, Felix kicked him directly. "All right, that's enough. If she really slaps you, you'll have it coming." Even after the kick, Jake cheekily leaned back in. "But seriously, I never thought you two would actually end up together." I swirled the drink in my glass, my ears buzzing. "Jake, you really talk a lot." Of course, Jake was unfazed. He ignored me and started muttering to himself, "Do you remember the first time you two met? You started fighting right away. And wasn't that partly your faults?" I said, completely exasperated. Felix threw his hands up, shrugging, with a look that said, "Don't look at me." Jake looked at me with a wounded expression and whined, "But didn't we end up playing house with you for half a month after that?" He paused, then let out an unwilling howl. "A whole half a month." I rubbed my temple and ignored him, turning my gaze to a spot in the distance. Who knew that would suddenly get Jake all fired up again? He nudged my arm with his elbow and pointed with his chin at a young woman in the distance who was wearing an evening gown in the same color as mine. I narrowed my eyes. This was my and Larry's wedding reception. Logically, any female guest with a bit of social grace would have avoided wearing the same color or style as the bride. This lady, however, was one of a kind. "That's the daughter of the Lynn family, Sylvia Lynn," Felix said, following our gaze. Jake clicked his tongue and added, during the 3 years you were away, she was chasing after Larry relentlessly. She never missed any event he attended. I really didn't expect her to show up at your and Larry's wedding. I suppressed a wave of irritation and let out a soft "oh." Looking at her pearl white evening gown, I found it more and more displeasing. From afar, Sylvia Lynn looked at me, raised her glass, and gave me a slight smile. A declaration of war, Jake's excited voice rang in my ear. She's declaring war on you, Joanna. I didn't say anything. I raised my glass in a toast back to her, the custom diamond ring on my finger sparkling brilliantly under the lights. What was I supposed to fight with? I was, for a fact, missing those 3 years in J City. Just as I was about to get up to find Larry, Sylvia appeared in front of me. Her face was pure and lovely, like a delicate, innocent little flower. Mississippi Booth, she began with a smile, her voice crisp and sweet. This wedding dress is beautiful. My gaze fell on the gown she was wearing, and I nodded. Speaking of which, before Mississippi Booth returned to the country, she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her shoulder, I also ordered a similar wedding dress. They look almost identical. Sylvia's eyes lingered on me, then she suddenly smiled apologetically. Please don't mind. Identical? Was she talking about the same dress, or the same man? I leaned back slightly, loosely crossing my arms, and looked at her with amusement. Mississippi Lynn, if you have something to say, you can say it directly. I don't quite understand these subtleties. What I mean is, there's a certain order to things, a first come, first served, Sylvia retorted. It's just so annoying when someone cuts in line. I smiled. You're right. There should be a first come, first served. I ignored this little white flower and turned to the two guys who were thoroughly enjoying the drama. I've only been gone for 3 years, and the social circle has updated this quickly? Jake immediately sat up straight. Of course not, sis. He lowered his voice, but just enough for everyone present to hear clearly. This one was never even in the circle to begin with. Sylvia, standing nearby, paled instantly, the smile on her face slowly freezing. I glanced at Sylvia and was about to speak when I saw Larry walking towards us. I hadn't told Jake and the others about my amnesia yet. I quickly stood up, walked to Larry's side, and looped my arm through his, my voice tinged with grievance. Husband. What's wrong? Larry stopped beside me, not taking another step forward. Sylvia put on a proper smile again, looking at Larry with a hint of shyness, and cooed, Mr. Larry. I felt a faint green glow starting to form above my head. Larry didn't even glance her way. He kept his head turned towards me and asked again softly, What's wrong? Your romantic baggage has come knocking. And you're asking what's wrong? I blinked, looking at Larry innocently. Mississippi Lynn said I came between you and her. Beside us, Sylvia's eyes widened, as if she never expected me to tattle on her to Larry with such embellishment. She waved her hands, looking completely wronged. I didn't, Mr. Larry. Larry looked her up and down for less than a second, then turned back to me, his brows slightly furrowed. I don't know her. I deliberately avoided Larry's gaze and looked elsewhere. You'd better not know her. All right, Larry's voice had a hint of a smile in it. Shall I take you somewhere else? I didn't answer, but my hand very honestly hooked onto his arm. Larry looked at Jake and the others, smiling warmly but politely. I'll be taking Joanna with me. You guys have fun. Jake looked slightly stunned and nodded dumbly. It was nearly 1 in the morning by the time we got back to the villa. After washing up in the master bedroom, I sat down on the soft, large bed. This past week, Larry and I had slept in separate rooms. It was Larry's idea. His reason was that although we were legally married, we hadn't had the official wedding ceremony yet. Of course, that suited me just fine. I might have amnesia, but that didn't mean I was willing to share a bed with Larry. Even with that thought, I still sat on the bed, subconsciously staring at the closed wooden door of the bedroom. Time ticked by, but there was no sound from outside the master bedroom door. I gripped the thin blanket, my hands creating a mess of wrinkles on the once smooth surface. I pursed my lips. This was for the best. It seemed he was just going through the motions after all. I didn't have to act out some lovey-dovey drama anymore. Click. The bedroom door was suddenly pushed open. Larry stood in the doorway, wearing a black silk robe. The warm light from outside softened his usually casual, unruly silhouette. For some reason, I felt a little angry. "What are you doing here?" The moment the words left my mouth, I froze. That tone didn't sound right. It sounded like a wife getting angry at her husband for staying out all night. Larry's lips curved into a smile. On our wedding night, how could I leave my Joanna to spend it all alone? With that, he walked to the other side of the bed and sat down as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His unique woody scent swirled around me, tangling my thoughts. "Weren't you waiting for me too, Joanna?" Larry's gaze fell on me, his voice laced with a lazy, teasing smile. I was in disbelief. "Who was waiting for you?" Larry raised an eyebrow at my response, his gaze intriguing. "Has Joanna's memory returned?" "I forgot about that." I closed my eyes, instantly switching my emotions, and said with a touch of grievance, "I just thought my husband wasn't coming." "I don't remember. Will my husband still like me? Are the things from before that important to my husband?" I feigned a sob, throwing the questions at Larry. Larry looked at me with amusement. "Isn't it all still you? Besides, didn't I say," he paused for a moment before continuing, "that husband would help you remember? From the first time we met as kids, you've had a crush on me. You chased me relentlessly after that, until we finally got together this year. And after we got together, you cried and begged me to marry you." Larry tilted his head with a smile. "And so we did, didn't we? What kind of nonsense are you spouting?" I turned my head, instinctively wanting to argue back. But Larry suddenly reached out, pulled my hand, and leaned in. The kiss was completely unexpected. The whole tirade I had planned against him vanished from my mind. All that was left was my heart, pounding like a drum. I felt a little flustered. The kiss gradually deepened. Our bodies were pressed together, our breaths mingling. Strangely, I didn't seem to mind. My hands unconsciously clutched his pajama top, and I leaned back, unable to take the intensity. "Larry." His voice was deep and steady, with an indescribable gentleness. Larry finally let me go, but he kept his head buried in my neck, gently sniffing at something. His slow, restrained breaths tickled my skin. I couldn't help but shrug my shoulders, but the hands around my waist tightened. I gently pushed him away, creating a little distance between us. Larry's gaze was dark, and his Adam's apple bobbed heavily. "No," I said, my eyes lowered. "At least." I scrambled for an excuse. "At least until my memory comes back." Larry reached out a hand and slowly combed through my slightly messy long hair. "Then I'll wait for my Joanna." I snuck a peek at him, tentatively leaned against him a bit, and loosely wrapped my arms around his waist. A laugh escaped Larry's lips, a little hoarse and deep, making my ears turn red. He stroked my hair and said very softly, "Let's sleep, Joanna." Moonlight cast fragmented, dappled shadows by the window. I watched Larry's sleeping profile, my heart still pounding fiercely. "Larry, actually, you like me a little bit too, don't you?" Not long after the wedding banquet, Jake started organizing get-togethers every few days again. "Jake, Joanna, it's been a few days, but it feels like forever. How about a little get-together this weekend? Remember to bring Larry along. Is he your husband or my husband? Besides, how am I supposed to keep up my act if we go together? It'll be game over." I glanced at Larry, who was on the sofa looking over some documents, then lowered my head and continued typing. "Me, ask him yourself." Jake replied almost instantly. "Joanna, haven't you noticed something's off with Larry? Jake, at your wedding, he didn't even come over to me and Felix. The way he looked at us was like we were strangers." As if typing wasn't enough to convey his sorrow, he sent several voice messages. I played the first one. I didn't realize it was on speaker. For a moment, the only sound in the villa was Jake's loud wailing. Larry, who had been reading a document, paused, his gaze flicking over my phone before returning to the file. I quickly turned down the volume and, with a headache, tried to console him. Maybe the lighting was too dim, and he didn't notice. Don't worry, he's still the Larry who loves you most. The reply took a moment. Then you have to bring Larry this weekend. Fine. I looked up again at Larry. He seemed to be lost in thought, his legs crossed casually, the file in his hands not having been turned for a long time. Lee. Larry raised an eyebrow and turned to look at me. I paused, cleared my throat, and started again. Husband, Jake wants us to go to a party this weekend. Was that Jake's voice just now? Larry asked, avoiding my question. I nodded and asked again, are we going? Larry pursed his lips at my question and said flatly, no, I'm too busy with work. I pouted and muttered under my breath, never seen anyone so busy during their honeymoon. What did you say? Nothing. I slipped on my slippers and went upstairs to the bedroom, leaving Larry alone in the living room. The next day, it was the weekend. The other side of the bed had been empty all night. I washed up and went downstairs, planning to have a simple breakfast. In the living room, Larry was leaning back on the sofa with his eyes closed. A pile of documents was on the table in front of him. Was he sleeping? Larry? Larry's brow furrowed slightly as he opened his eyes, his voice a little hoarse. Why are you sleeping here? I asked, confused. Larry's gaze rested on me, and he didn't speak for a moment. I bent down and waved my hand in front of his face. Larry suddenly grabbed my waving hand. His thumb caressed my wrist, sending a ticklish sensation through me. I'm awake, Larry's voice was low and raspy. Go get changed. I pulled my hand back, unconsciously rubbing my wrist, confused. Get changed? A corner of Larry's mouth lifted into a faint smile. Don't you want to go on a honeymoon? Honeymoon? I was completely lost. Larry stood up and ruffled my hair. Yeah, I'm taking you out. I was still in a daze even after I was seated on the private jet. Beside me, Larry was resting with his eyes closed. So Larry had pulled an all-nighter handling business matters? For our honeymoon? I gazed at Larry's profile, and my heart inexplicably skipped a beat. I asked the flight attendant for a thin blanket and gently draped it over Larry. The man's brow twitched slightly, and a smile lifted the corners of his lips. I must have fallen asleep. In a daze, I felt Larry lift me up, still wrapped in the blanket that had somehow appeared on me. It felt like I was nestled in his arms again, riding in a car for a long time. Finally, I fell into a deep sleep on a soft, large bed. By the time I woke up again, it was already 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Larry was sitting on the bed, browsing financial news on his tablet with a focused expression. I pursed my lips and gently tugged on the corner of his shirt. I'm awake. Larry grabbed my hand and gently kneaded my fingertips. So, does my Joanna want to get up? Emicham, I mumbled, my face half buried in the quilt. It turned out Larry and I were staying in a private beachfront villa. From inside the villa, you could see the entire ocean, and on the beach, there were quite a few foreigners playing and having fun. In the distance, waves constantly rushed onto the shore, crashing against the reefs and splashing into countless tiny water droplets. I had changed into my swimsuit and was about to head out with my flip-flops in hand to feel the soft, fine sand when Larry stopped me. Don't you know how to swim? Larry asked, standing at the doorway, looking at me. I replied, well, yeah, but this one looks really nice. Emicham, it's nice, Larry smiled. But we have to go somewhere else for dinner tonight. How about changing into something else? I tugged at the frills of my swimsuit, hesitating at the door. Larry walked over to me, took the flip-flops from my other hand, and took my hand in his. I remember Joanna brought a lot of other pretty dresses, didn't she? I did have quite a few. I inexplicably followed Larry upstairs and changed into a long slip dress. Around 7:30 in the evening local time, the various lights outside the street-side shops began to light up one after another. Larry led me into a semi-open-air restaurant. The restaurant was strung with small light bulbs everywhere, playing soft, gentle instrumental music. Larry sat across from me, his long, well-defined fingers tapping rhythmically on the tabletop. As if sensing my gaze, he smiled, clearly in a good mood, and said slowly, "Is it a nice view?" I paused but didn't look away. After thinking for a long while, I finally said, "What would happen if I got my memory back?" Larry's fingers paused their tapping, and he leaned back lazily. Nothing would happen. His eyes met mine, deep and profound, and his voice was very soft. It would still be the Joanna I love. I quickly looked away and picked up the cocktail on the table to take a sip. My face felt slightly hot. It must have been because the drink was too strong. Larry let out a low chuckle. "And what about you, Joanna?" "And me?" I looked down, thinking. I subconsciously pinched my index finger with my thumb. The instrumental music in the restaurant, which had been nearing its end, faded out and was replaced by Get You the Moon. I smelled the unique scent of pine that belonged to Larry again. I finally looked up and gazed quietly at Larry. "Then I'd like you too." Larry's Adam's apple bobbed slightly, his eyes darkening. "Joanna, say that again?" I shot him a glare. "If you didn't hear it, too bad." Larry looked at me and smiled faintly. "I heard you." I couldn't help but let the corners of my mouth curve upward. For the next 3 or 4 days, Larry and I were practically swimming in honey. It felt like this was what it was really like to be in a relationship with him. When we returned to J City, it was a rainy day. There was so much work piled up from the vacation that Larry went straight to the office as soon as we landed. I stood on the curb waiting for the driver, idly scrolling through the latest news and gossip on my phone. My phone vibrated several times in a row. It was all messages from Jake. "Joanna? You back? That gossip post has to be fake, don't actually believe it." Before I could even process it, he sent another message a moment later. "Even if it's true, it's in the past. Trust Larry." I frowned and opened X, searching for Larry's name. The first result that popped up was, Larry Sylvia. I clicked on it, and the top post had an even more eye-catching headline. "The Larry Group's heir and his one that got away. Soulmates destined to be, cruelly torn apart by an interloper." The entire post described how Larry met and fell in love with his old flame, Sylvia Lynn, during college. Everyone thought they would get married after graduation, but unexpectedly, another heiress from J City swooped in first. The post implied, not so subtly, that this heiress was the other woman. And this heiress, as luck would have it, was me. I stood on the side of the road, looking at the overwhelming condemnation online. Some irrational netizens had even flooded the long and active official account of the Booth Group with angry comments. Those 3 years again. The 3 years I was studying abroad. I locked my phone. I thought back to Larry's reaction at the wedding reception, lost in thought. Gary had already pulled the black Bentley up in front of me. He got out, put my luggage from beside me into the trunk, and then opened the car door for me. "Ma'am, Mr. Larry asked me to pick you up." I nodded without a word. Gary glanced at my expression and then suddenly added, "Mr. Larry is still at the company handling business." I didn't look at him again, got into the car, and closed my eyes. The car moved slowly, the only sound being the pitter-patter of rain against the windows. It was suffocating. The ringing of my phone broke the stifling silence. I opened my eyes and looked at the lit-up screen. "Dad." I rubbed my temples and answered the call. "Joanna, are you on your way home?" "Yeah. Larry and I are in a meeting about the Southside project. The project proposal is in your study. Can you find it for Dad?" "Where's Larry?" I asked. Gary, who was driving, glanced at me in the rearview mirror and quickly looked away. "Him? He's reading a file." I closed my eyes and replied flatly, "Got it." The scenery outside the window flew by in a blur, and even the sky was a dreary, overcast gray. It was nearly evening by the time I reached the villa. I was in the study, searching for the Southside project proposal. By chance, I came across a diagnostic report in a drawer. It was dated the day of the car accident before my wedding to Larry. Joanna, stress syndrome. Faked. I tugged at the corner of my mouth and flipped to the next page. Larry, temporary amnesia. I froze for a moment, then continued reading. The patient's head suffered a severe impact, resulting in a certain degree of memory loss and an inability to recall past experiences. I mumbled the symptoms from the diagnostic report. In addition to this report, there was a confidentiality agreement signed with the attending physician. Must not disclose any information about the patient to any third party. To avoid causing fluctuations in the Larry Group's stock price. So, Larry was the one who truly had amnesia. For the sake of the company's stock price, he hid his condition from everyone. He even acted as if he had never lost his memory at all. He had perfectly deceived everyone. I suddenly remembered what Jake had said to me that day. Joanna, haven't you noticed something's off with Larry? The way he looked at us was like we were strangers. And Larry's refusal to attend any of the get-togethers with the old gang. And at the wedding reception, when he said I don't know her about Sylvia. I clenched the papers in my hand. Larry, was it that you didn't know her, or that you didn't remember her? Could it be that your love for me was also just a carefully crafted performance? After Gary left with the project proposal, I don't know how long I sat in the study. It wasn't until night fell and the entire room was plunged into darkness that I picked up my phone, which I had long since silenced. There were dozens of missed calls. All from Larry. There were also many unread messages on my messenger. I opened my chat with Larry. Link, the Larry Group's clarification on today's rumors regarding the CEO. The content was essentially a refutation of the gossip post and a statement that they would be suing some of the malicious commenters. Joanna. I just got out of a meeting. Wait for me at home. About 10 minutes later, he sent another one. I don't know her. The last message was sent a minute ago. I'm almost home, wait for me. Almost home? I shot up from my chair and rushed outside. Right now, I didn't want to see him. Or rather, I didn't dare. I didn't dare to face the amnesiac Larry. I was scared. Scared that he never actually liked me at all. I drove my car out of the garage and headed towards the apartment I lived in alone before the wedding. Just as I was about to step into the building entrance, my phone rang. It was Larry. I pressed the green answer key. Joanna, Larry's voice trembled, filled with an unprecedented urgency and anxiety. Larry, I cut him off coolly. I lied to you. After a short pause, I spoke again. I never had amnesia. Maybe just for fun, I pretended to have amnesia after the car accident. I'm sorry for tricking you for so long. I don't want to pretend anymore. So you don't have to put so much effort into your performance either. I could hear his uneven breathing through the receiver. I hung up the phone. Later, Larry called several more times in succession. I didn't answer again. Back in my familiar home, I habitually sat in the armchair by the window. All around was silent, and the lights in the neighboring houses went out one by one. My apartment isn't on a very high floor, but I can still see parts of the complex. But now, everything outside the window was shrouded in the night, looking blurry and unreal. A beam of light shot from the distance, piercing the darkness, and gradually approached. It finally came to a sharp stop downstairs. It was the silver-gray sports car that Larry had previously parked in the villa's garage. I subconsciously got up and walked to the window, wanting to get a clearer look. Unexpectedly, my gaze met Larry's as he looked up in this direction. He was leaning against the car, the cigarette between his fingers glowing with a faint red dot. He was still wearing the same clothes he had on when he got off the plane today. I lowered my gaze and drew the curtains. The phone I had placed to the side lit up a few seconds later. It was a text message from Larry. Good night, Joanna. I didn't sleep well. My dreams were filled with memories of Larry. One moment, it was scenes of us bickering as children. The next, it was my time with Larry after we got married. As the sky began to lighten, I found myself at the floor-to-ceiling window again. The silver-gray sports car was slowly driving towards the complex gate. I bit my lower lip and drew the curtains again. I thought Larry wouldn't come back. Unexpectedly, he was downstairs for several days in a row. And on the morning of the second day, he would drive out of the complex. On Messenger, apart from a daily good night, there were no other words. The rain in J City had been falling continuously for days. The day the rain was at its heaviest, I got a call from my mom. "Sweetie," Mom's voice sounded like she had just gotten out of the airport, the sound of rain pouring down in the background. "Why is it raining the moment I get back?" Mom complained, then immediately added, "How about Mom goes on another trip?" "You should ask Dad if he agrees first," I said, a little exasperated. My mom had recently become obsessed with watching short videos. One day, she must have come across a travel video. Deeply influenced by the inspirational captions, she immediately decided to go on a spontaneous trip. She decisively ditched my dad, who was always working, and flew straight to her destination. She only returned to J City today. After chatting with her for a while, she finally got into the family car. "Sweetie, how are you and Larry getting along?" I froze. It's okay, I guess. He's a good kid," my mom continued on the phone. "When it came to choosing your new house, he made all the decisions himself. He didn't let us worry about a thing." "The new house?" I asked, confused. "Your villa." From choosing the location to the renovation, little Larry handled everything personally. Long after the call ended, I still hadn't recovered. That villa that neither of us had ever set foot in before. He had personally arranged and decorated it. So when he told me that day that every blade of grass and every tree in the yard was planted just the way I liked it, he wasn't joking either. But how did the amnesiac Larry know that? The rain fell even harder after nightfall. Large raindrops slammed against the window, leaving watery streaks. That silver-gray sports car was still parked downstairs, waiting quietly. I held my phone, opened my chat with Larry, and repeatedly typed, deleted, and retyped. After a long hesitation, I finally pressed send. "The rain is really heavy. Do you want to come up?" There was no reply. A moment later, the phone screen glowed with a white light. "Open the door." "So you've already figured out my building's passcode and my apartment number?" Larry stood at the door, his shirt slightly damp, clinging in spots to his lean waistline. His dark hair was also dotted with water droplets, scattered messily across his forehead. His eyes, which were usually full of a lazy, flippant charm, were now wet and glistening. I blinked. Right now, he looked like a poor, pathetic, drenched puppy. Larry took a step forward and took my hand, which was hanging by my side. His voice was a little hoarse. "Joanna." I smelled the faint scent of tobacco on him. Seeing I didn't react, he squeezed my fingertips and called out again in a very low voice, "Joanna." I sighed inwardly and responded with a soft "MHM," taking his cool hand in mine and leading him into the living room. "It's been raining all day. Didn't you have an umbrella in the car?" I handed him a clean towel. Larry took it but just draped it over his head. After a long pause, he finally spoke, unnaturally, "It's broken." "What?" Larry looked away. "The umbrella broke." Looking at the drenched puppy on the sofa, I couldn't help but chuckle. "Did you just break it?" Larry seemed to catch my short laugh, and his dark, moist eyes stared at me without blinking, with little specks of light in them. "Joanna." "MHM." I stood beside him, one knee on the sofa, and reached out to dry the water from his hair. Larry got a little bolder, wrapping his arms around my waist, his body inching closer, testing the waters. "Larry," I said, feeling his damp body, my voice a warning. Larry didn't move, still leaning against me with his arms around me. Larry, I have a reasonable suspicion that you're playing the victim. But as luck would have it, it seems I, Joanna, fall for this kind of thing. Go take a shower first, I said, giving him a little push, trying to create some distance. At my words, Larry just nuzzled his head against me a couple more times. Let's hug a little longer. The scent of pine mixed with a faint smell of tobacco filled my nose. It wasn't unpleasant. I touched his half-damp shirt. You've been smoking. I looked down at Larry and added, it stinks. And so, less than a few seconds later, the man had gotten up without hesitation and headed to the bathroom. I walked into the guest bedroom carrying a glass of warm water. Larry was sitting on the edge of the bed, his hair fluffy and dry, clearly having just blown it dry. I put down the water glass, ready to leave the room. Joanna. Larry stood up and grabbed my hand. I'm sorry. I stopped, glanced at him, and muttered under my breath, now you're saying sorry. I heard Larry let out a soft, low chuckle, and then a pair of hands wrapped firmly around my waist. My waist tightened, and by the time I realized what was happening, I was sitting in Larry's lap. I thought you didn't want to see me, he explained. Besides, an apology has more sincerity when it's said in person. Larry's voice was low and slightly husky, whispering right next to my ear, sending a tingling sensation through my heart. Are you saying I'm not sincere? I frowned, glaring at him in annoyance. No, Larry denied immediately, his tone quite gentle. Joanna's apology is the most sincere. He looked up at me, a faint smile playing on his lips. I couldn't help but trace his brow and eyes with my fingers. Are you still Larry? I asked tentatively. Larry was taken aback for a moment, but then he laughed helplessly. Joanna, I have amnesia, I didn't have a soul swap. Then I mumbled something unintelligible. Larry didn't hear clearly and moved closer to me. What? I took a deep breath and repeated quickly, after you get your memory back, will you still like me? In truth, this was the only thing I had been worried about all along. My hand caressed his cheek. Larry gently nuzzled against it and replied in a warm voice, didn't I say, it's always the Joanna I love? Oh, a smile tugged at my lips, a joy I couldn't quite suppress, but I still retorted disingenuously, you can't be sure. Larry was almost exasperated enough to laugh. He kept one arm around my waist, and with the other, he took out his phone, unlocked it, and handed it to me. I was confused. He suddenly wants me to check his phone? Larry raised an eyebrow slightly. Open it and see. I took the phone, went straight to his messenger, and warned, Larry, I'd advise you not to be too confident. Why is that? Haven't you heard? I glanced at Larry. There's a saying online, no woman can come out of a man's phone smiling. Larry hummed in response, his voice laced with a hint of teasing. Well, Joanna might just be the exception. I ignored him and focused on the phone. Actually, there wasn't much to check. Most of Larry's contacts were just concise names. Only me was pinned at the top, with the note wifey. I thought for a moment and slowly typed Sylvia Lynn into the search bar. No related contacts. I shook the phone lightly, satisfied. Not bad. Larry looked at me with amusement. Just not bad? My voice lifted at the end, filled with blatant smugness. Larry took his phone back and wrapped his arm around me so we could both see the screen. He opened his own social media feed and said in a low voice, this is it. His long fingers slowly scrolled down the screen. I saw many posts that were visible only to him. But every single one was about me. It looked like he started documenting back in high school. From complaining about me being like a proud, flashy white peacock at the beginning, to gradually using words like cute and like more frequently. Every post was the best proof of a young boy's budding love over a long period of time. There was a 3-year gap in the middle, the time when I was abroad. The more recent entries were dated after I came back, when our families arranged the marriage. And the last post stopped on the day of our car accident. My face grew warmer and warmer, until it felt like it was burning. I couldn't stop the corners of my lips from turning up. "So, Larry, you've had a crush on me since way back then?" Larry looked at my triumphant expression and couldn't resist giving me a quick kiss. "From the looks of it, yes." He paused, then added, "And that feeling has lasted until now. So all those times you fought with me, you were just trying to get my attention?" Larry's eyes twinkled with a smile as he feigned deep thought. "That, I don't know." I punched Larry lightly on the shoulder. "You'd better remember, and fast." "All right." Larry's eyes were smiling as he swiftly lifted me onto the bed. "So can we go to sleep now, wifey?" I wrapped my arms around Larry's neck, initiated a kiss, and then lifted my chin. "Emicham, permission granted." Larry didn't move. He looked down at me, his gaze deepening. The arm around my waist gradually tightened. Larry cupped my face with one hand, his kisses falling over and over again. In a daze, I heard his hoarse voice. "Joanna, give yourself to me." The once heart-wrenchingly lonely big dog had transformed into an energetic wolf, savoring a delicious meal bite by bite. That night, I finally, truly understood the difference in physical stamina between Larry and me. The next day, Larry and I returned to the villa in the southern part of the city. Life back at the villa was even more comfortable than before. Before Larry left for the office, he would come back to the bed and kiss me while I was still snuggled under the covers. He would also often bring home a gift when he got off work. Sometimes it was a bouquet of fresh flowers, other times it was a delicacy I had shared with him. I always felt the urge to show off to someone. But unfortunately, my contact list was full of fake socialite friends. So Jake and Felix became the unwilling recipients of our public displays of affection. Me, today's dose of happiness, Larry gave me a star. The attached picture was a certificate for a named star. A few seconds later, Jake's voice message arrived as expected. Jake howled, "Joanna, a dog's life is still a life." This clown made me laugh, and my lips curved into a smile. Larry, sitting beside me, had his arm around my waist, browsed the news on his tablet with one hand. I looked up at him from his embrace. "Larry, do you really have no memory of them?" Larry bent his head to kiss me and answered in a low voice, "MHM, I don't remember. Jake is organizing another get-together this weekend. Want to go and see?" I tugged on the hem of Larry's shirt, suggesting, "What if you remember something?" "Okay." Unexpectedly, Larry had more files to deal with on the weekend than on a workday. I waited for him at home, planning to go to the destination with him. He didn't call to say he was on his way back until long after normal work hours. Dusk began to fall, and Larry still hadn't arrived. By the time Larry's special ringtone sounded, night had already fallen. "Hello, I'm a doctor from J City Hospital. The patient is unconscious due to a car accident and is currently undergoing an examination. Please come to the hospital as soon as possible." 3 minutes later, I ran out of the house in a panic. On the way to the hospital, I was driving and calling Gary at the same time. "Ma'am, it was a rear-end collision, but for some reason, Mr. Larry fell into a coma. He's being examined now." I pressed down on the accelerator, speeding up. When I arrived at the hospital room door, the doctor was just coming out. I took 2 steps forward and asked anxiously, "Doctor, I'm Larry's wife. How is he now?" "The patient has woken up. He has some scrapes on his head, and the small amount of clotted blood in his brain has been slowly absorbed. There are no major issues now. He can be discharged shortly, but he will need a follow-up checkup later." The tension that had been building up inside me all this time finally eased a little. Realizing what he said, I paused. "Does that mean his amnesia is cured too?" The doctor nodded and then hurried off to the next patient's room. The hospital was brightly lit. Larry, wearing a loose-fitting hospital gown with a bandage wrapped around his forehead, was already sitting up on the side of the bed. I stood at the door of the hospital room, hesitating to take a step forward. Larry seemed to sense my presence and turned his head to look over. My heart raced, but I unconsciously slowed my breathing. When Larry saw me, he raised his right eyebrow playfully. What are you doing standing there like a fool? His tone had that familiar, lazy casualness. A smile played on his lips as he spoke again, unhurriedly. Aren't you going to come and kiss your husband? My nose tingled, and I quickly walked over to Larry, throwing myself into his arms. Larry hugged me back tightly, his warm breath fanning against my ear. He placed a hand on the top of my head and gently ruffled my hair twice. Little peacock, what are you crying for? The moment he said that, I started crying even harder. My mistake, my mistake. Larry was at a complete loss, constantly wiping my tears with his fingers and cooing, "It's my little princess." Larry cupped my face, gently placed a kiss, and his voice was a little choked up. "You're my wife, Larry's wife." END. Bonus chapter. Larry. Larry, CEO of the Larry Group, has been in an exceptionally good mood lately. Whether at work or at parties, his charming eyes always carried a very noticeable smile. He wouldn't answer when asked, leaving everyone completely baffled. Since they were little, Larry had loved to tease Joanna, loved to see her cheeks puffed up in anger. Back then, he thought he could never fall for a pampered, willful, and flamboyant girl like Joanna. But in the days that followed, his gaze would always unconsciously follow that charming figure. He didn't know when it started, but he began to secretly look forward to every time Joanna picked a fight, began to act like a little boy teasing the girl he liked just to get her attention. He had originally planned to confess to her at graduation, to make his love for her official. But who knew that after graduating high school, he would never see Joanna again? And later, whenever he thought back on his entire adolescence, it was all filled with the bright colors of her skirts. So when his parents asked if he was willing to marry into the Booth family, he agreed almost without a second thought. Seeing their son's decisiveness, Mr. and Mrs. Larry thought he must have been through something traumatic, and they added dryly, "Actually, with our family situation, we don't have to get married for. We'll do it." Larry picked up his phone from the table, got up from his chair, and left them with just two more airy words. "We must." That night, another post appeared on his private social media feed. "Getting ready to raise a precious little peacock." At the same time, Joanna's feed was updated right after. "The worst news ever." As if that wasn't enough to express her feelings, she added several crying emojis at the end. Larry let out a small laugh and gave her post a like. And so, less than half a second later, the post disappeared. She wasn't willing. Larry locked his phone and let out a soft tsk. But he couldn't imagine seeing Joanna on another man's arm. This little peacock, he had to be the one to raise her. From that day on, Larry began to personally handle the arrangements for the marriage. The marital home, Joanna liked quiet, beautiful surroundings, so he chose the villa in the Southern District. The wedding venue, he ordered tens of thousands of roses to cover the venue, just like Joanna, bright and flamboyant. As for the wedding dress, that was something only Joanna could choose herself. Today, he and Joanna were in the Bentley, on their way to the bridal shop to finalize the last details. Larry, who had pulled an all-nighter to free up time, was leaning back against the seat, trying to catch a quick nap. "Larry, you..." The little peacock seemed to be flustered again. Larry took in Joanna's expression, a faint smile playing on his lips. "What is it now?" She turned away, arms crossed, looking as charmingly cute as ever. Larry's gaze was fixed on Joanna's fair face. Before the smile on his lips could fully bloom, he caught a glimpse of a private car speeding uncontrollably towards Joanna's side of the car out of the corner of his eye. Everything happened too fast. Without a second thought, Larry pulled Joanna, who was sitting by the window, into his arms and held her tight. The little peacock was afraid of pain, so he couldn't let her get hurt. When Larry woke up again, he was in a hospital bed. His mind was a complete blank. He didn't even know why he was in the hospital. It wasn't until the attending physician came over and explained his situation that his brain reacted instinctively. He signed a confidentiality agreement with the doctor. After the doctor left, he picked up his slightly cracked phone and started to piece together his missing memories. And so, through the private posts on his messenger, he traveled back through the long years and glimpsed his silent crush, and this long premeditated wedding. After that, he went to Joanna's hospital room. But he didn't know how to face her. Joanna was lying in her hospital bed, wearing a hospital gown, talking to the doctor. Her gaze gradually fell on him. When their eyes met, her eyes suddenly turned red, her expression utterly aggrieved, and her voice choked with tears. "Husband." Larry's heart pounded, again and again. Seeing her tears fall, his own heart was filled with a dense, aching feeling. The face that had been missing from his memory gradually became clear. Larry leaned down and placed a kiss, soothing her gently. This was indeed his little peacock, he thought. Bonus chapter. After Larry got his memory back, I always felt particularly awkward. Although all signs pointed to Larry liking me first, now whenever I meet his smiling eyes, I can't help but feel shy. Joanna. Larry parked the car in front of Jake's newly opened bar. I sat in the passenger seat, glanced at Larry's exquisite profile, then quickly turned my head back, staring straight ahead at the flower baskets outside the front window. I heard a helpless sigh beside me. I turned my head in confusion, only to be met with the man's face, up close. Larry cupped my face, his lips pressing firmly against mine. The intimate intertwining of our lips and tongues was filled with his scent. A moment later, he let me go, his eyes filled with an indescribable tenderness. "How much longer are you going to be shy?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I felt a pang of guilt and said stubbornly, Who's shy?" His gaze fell back on my lips, a smile playing at the corners. "My wife is not shy." Wife. This was the first time Larry had called me wife since he got his memory back. I blinked rapidly, unable to suppress the smile on my lips. It was quiet in the car, and my little heart was pounding wildly. Could he hear it too? Like a thief with something to hide, I pressed my hand to my chest, which only earned a low chuckle from Larry. "So cute." He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes as he reached out to ruffle my hair. I looked up at him, and he looked back at me. Just as the next kiss was about to happen, there was a sudden knock on the car window. Knock, knock, knock. Jake's big face was pressed against the window, craning his neck to see if he could make anything out. Outside, Jake was chattering away. "Why is this tinted? I can't see a thing." Felix, standing beside him, sounded completely helpless. "If they want to get out, they'll get out. Do you need to worry about it?" Jake was immediately dissatisfied and started yelling, "Larry hasn't been here in forever, and today he said he'd come but he's already 10 minutes late. What if he bails on me again?" Before he could finish, Larry opened the car door and got out. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "I'm 10 minutes late. So what?" Jake, who had been following Larry around like a puppy since they were kids, immediately lost his nerve. Naturally, I must invite my beloved brother Larry inside. In the private room, after a few rounds of drinks, Larry told his friends about his previous amnesia. Jake slammed his glass on the table, spilling a good amount of liquor. "I knew it," he exclaimed, his expression agitated. "I noticed something was off with Larry a long time ago. I just didn't think he wouldn't even tell us." Jake's voice grew quieter and quieter, and he ended up taking a sulky gulp of his drink. I glanced at Larry beside me, signaling him to go and comfort Jake. Larry leaned back on the sofa, one leg bent and the other straight, holding a clear glass in his hand, and shook his head at me. Sure enough, Jake's gloom didn't last more than a few seconds before he suddenly stood up again. "But I can understand. After all, with Larry's big family, who wouldn't be a little cautious?" Here, he picked up his glass and raised it high. "To love, and to tomorrow." In this state, he was clearly drunk. Everyone exchanged a look and a smile, but still stood up and joined him. Larry took my hand, pulled me to his side, and wrapped his arm around my waist. We all raised our glasses and clinked them together. The light refracted through the splashing liquor, creating dazzling stars. Time turns, but the old gang remains the same. To love, and to tomorrow.